faithfully delivering value, interpreting great books worldwide. Hello, this is Sally Book Talk. Today I'll interpret for you this book called The 300 Years of North-South Wars, with the subtitle Military and Regime in China from the 4th to 6th Centuries. The author is a history PhD from Tsinghua University. Shuo, if you're a researcher or enthusiast of ancient Chinese warfare, you'll find that war descriptions in the vast historical records are very brief. Take the Battle of Changping as an example. This major clash between Qin and Zhao had a deep impact on Chinese history. But Sima Quan's Records of the Grand Historian focuses on high-level decisions, general strategies, and diplomatic maneuvers, while specifics like weapons and tactics are vague. Historians after Sima Kwai became even more dismissive. A big battle often just got a quick note on the outcome and death toll. So, where did Chinese folks get their war impressions from? The answer comes from literary works like Romance of the Three Kingdoms, The Story of Yue Fei, and Water Margin. These classics set a fixed pattern for war scenes, armies facing off, sending generals to duel for hundreds of rounds. Winners charge ahead, losers panic and retreat. Obviously, real war wasn't fought like that. The question is, how did ancient Chinese actually battle? Today's book, The 300 Years of North-South Wars, digs into classical texts, analyzes deeply, and speculates reasonably to reconstruct ancient Chinese warfare. And note that the 300 years in the title refers to the Wei, Jin, and Southern and Northern dynasties. But a good chunk of the book covers other dynasties like the Spring and Autumn, Warring States, Han, and Three Kingdoms periods, and because that's the only way to explain the whole story clearly. My narration follows suit, not stuck in any one era. So next up, I'll break this book down into 4 parts. Part 1, Infantry Reigns Supreme, introduces how ancient infantry fought. Part 2, The Rise of Cavalry, covers how cavalry became the main military force. Part 3, Strategic Tone, Offense and Defense, talks about southern regimes using infantry against northern cavalry. Part 4, The Mystery of Unification, revealing why unification was usually achieved by northern regimes from a military angle. All right, so next we start with Part 1, Infantry Reigns Supreme. How did ancient infantry fight? Infantry was the earliest main military branch. This was true not only in ancient China, but also in ancient Greece and Rome. The reason is simple. Compared to cavalry, infantry is easier to train and has lower training costs. Moreover, before the invention of the stirrup, cavalry's combat effectiveness wasn't much stronger than infantry's. Of course, in one-on-one combat, infantry is never a match for cavalry. Infantry's winning strategy is the battle formation. When we talk about this, some might immediately think of formations like the snake array or 8 trigrams array, but these are fictional creations by novelists. If you actually use them in battle, you'll just be waiting to get slaughtered by the enemy. The battle formations actually used in real combat aren't that complicated. They mainly consist of individual infantry squares. As the name suggests, a square formation means arranging soldiers in a square shape. The method is to have 5 soldiers in a row, called a wu, meaning 5 in the context of troops, and arranging rows of 5 forms the square formation. This is where the Chinese term xing wu originates. Of course, the number per row isn't strictly fixed. There could be 5, 10, 20, or even over 60 soldiers per row. The exact number depends on the scale of the battle and the battlefield situation. The spacing between soldiers is also deliberate. Generally, the left-right spacing is smaller to maintain a tight formation and prevent enemy penetration, while front-back spacing is a bit larger. This is to maintain the formation's mobility, allowing adjustments anytime. It can be said to be the basic combat unit of ancient infantry. One square formation after another constitutes the battle array. The Qin army formation, displayed in pit number 1 of the terracotta army of Qin Shi Han, is laid out this way. The largest square formation there has front rows of 68 soldiers each, with a frontal width of 57 meters and a depth of 184 meters. It's not hard to imagine the immense psychological burden such a massive formation advancing from the other end of the battlefield would impose on enemies. So, what role do commanders play in this? The answer is deploying troops and setting formations. Commanding the battle. The battle array is a very complex system. From large-scale movements like advancing or retreating, the whole formation, and coordinating between squares, down to small details like queue arrangements, all must follow orders. But the problem is, battlefields are usually noisy, and situations change rapidly. How do commanders deliver orders promptly to every soldier? This relies on two things: command flags and metal drums. Soldiers watch the command flags, change formation based on flag movements, and listen to the metal drums to decide whether to advance or retreat. That's what people mean by beat the drum to advance, sound the gong to retreat. Here's the thing. Most ancient soldiers weren't educated and had limited understanding, so complex orders easily caused chaos. Great commanders can simplify things, turning rookies into capable warriors in no time. Take this example. During the spring and autumn period, King Helu of Wu invited Sun Wu to train troops, but he doubted Sun Wu's skills, so he picked 180 palace maids for Sun Wu to test. Sun Wu first split the maids into two teams, meaning two square formations, and appointed two captains. Sun Wu stood at the front, waving the command flag. The direction it pointed meant advance. Raising the flag with the left hand meant turn left. With the right hand meant turn right. At first, the maids half-heartedly went through the motions, but after Sun Wu executed the two captains, they started training seriously. Soon after, Sun Wu reported to Helu, right? The formation's now orderly. They're ready to brave fire and water for you, my king. Sun Wu succeeded in training inexperienced maids, not just through strictness, but because his orders were simple, clear, and easy to follow. Otherwise, killing more captains wouldn't have helped. So for commanders, the key isn't leading the charge, but ensuring soldiers understand and execute orders. That's the core skill, and mastering it makes a legendary general. Famous generals like Zhao Shi and Bai Qi from the Warring States period excelled at training troops. Han Xin, who helped Liu Bao conquer the realm, was a master. He quickly turned recruits into warriors, to the point it became routine. New recruits were first given to Han Xin. After he drilled them to readiness, Liu Bang would lead them. You can see that the commander is like the brain of the formation. If the brain fails, the whole thing risks falling apart. This means the most effective way to beat the enemy is to break into their lines, disrupt or destroy their command center. This combat method is called charging into the formation, meaning to penetrate enemy defenses. So how do you charge into the formation? Gather strong soldiers into an assault team, punch one or two holes in the enemy formation, break it open, then flood in with the main force to split their troops. So this way, the enemy's command system gets disrupted. Generals' orders can't be delivered, and soldiers end up running around like headless flies, unless they have exceptional mental toughness and combat will. Under normal circumstances, ordinary soldiers would quickly collapse, causing the entire formation to crumble. But if you fail to break through the enemy formation, it could lead to total disaster. In 279 AD, the Western Jin launched the campaign to conquer Wu. In one battle, Eastern Wu concentrated 5,000 elites. They repeatedly charged the Jin formation but failed, causing Wu's morale to waver, while Jin counterattacked and won decisively. So what was Jin's winning secret? 3 words: great depth. Jin's square formations had fewer soldiers per row but more rows. This meant that after Wu forces broke one layer, there was another, making it nearly impossible to fully penetrate Jin's formation and create an opening to sever their command center. From the Warring States to the Three Kingdoms period, this narrow front deep depth formation remained dominant. That's exactly how Qin Shi Huang's terracotta army is deployed. By the late Western Jin period, with cavalry's rise, things changed again. With their powerful impact, cavalry could quickly break into formations and maneuver freely, exposing the deep formation's fatal flaw. Or, because the deeper the formation, the more soldiers it packed, making command harder and chaos more likely. Seeing this, commanders reduced depth, making infantry formations flatter, meaning less depth but wider fronts. Of course, cavalry's impact on ancient warfare went far beyond this. In part 2, I'll discuss how the rise of cavalry transformed warfare. Before cavalry's rise, ancient Chinese had already used horses in battle, through chariots. When King Wu attacked Zhou, he deployed 300 chariots to support infantry. By the Zhou dynasty, chariots became status symbols. Generally, only feudal lords and nobles were qualified to drive chariots. In the elementary text Cao Gui's Discourse on War, Duke Zhuang of Lu exceptionally allowed Cao Gui, the commoner, to board his chariot, showing special favor.
Back then, a state's chariot count, called sheng, reflected its power. More chariots meant greater strength.
During the spring and autumn period, Jin, Qi, and Chu each claimed to be a state of 1,000 sheng, meaning major powers. But over time, chariots' role diminished for two reasons. First, they required specific terrain. Only plains allowed full-speed charges. But in the late spring and autumn period, warfare became complex, with sieges, mountain battles, naval engagements, etc., becoming increasingly common. In these situations, chariots were powerless. Second was the emergence of battle formations. Facing orderly, dense, fully armed formations, chariot charges were rarely effective. Formations also developed defensive countermeasures. Shield bearers at the front blocked chariot advances, while crossbowmen at the flanks targeted riders. Under these circumstances, chariots stopped being the main force and instead supported infantry.
Typically, infantry would attack enemy formations first, with chariots charging only after creating an opening.
As chariots exited the stage, another branch began to shine: cavalry. Cavalry originated in the north, where nomadic peoples excelled at mounted archery and mobility. During the Warring States period, King Wuling of Zhao learned from nomads, forming cavalry units, historically called adopting nomadic attire and mounted archery. From then on, Zhao possessed powerful cavalry and produced generals like Li Mu, who excelled in using them. Other states followed suit, but for a long time, cavalry took auxiliary roles: scouting, flanking, ambushing small groups, not main combat. This was because stirrups hadn't been invented yet, making riders prone to falling during charges. So cavalry usually avoided head-on charges, preferring to shoot arrows from afar. Forcing cavalry to charge formations would have been suicidal. Nomadic cavalry fought similarly. Take the Xiongnu. They excelled at raids and harassment, but avoided positional warfare. In 200 BC, Emperor Gaozu of Han, Liu Bang, was trapped by Xiongnu cavalry at Mount Baiding, yet they never attacked, allowing a truce. So why didn't the ex-Xiongnu wipe out Liu Bang's army? The author argues that against Han formations, Xiongnu cavalry had no confidence in victory. In fact, during the early Han's first 60 years, Xiongnu invasions stayed near the northern border, never threatening capitals like Chang'an or Luoyang. This explains why Emperors Wen and Jing used appeasement and marriage alliances to placate the Xiongnu. Emperor Wu was different, young, vigorous, and determined to crush the Xiongnu. But how would he do it? Infantry obviously won't work. They're too slow to catch Xiongnu cavalry. So we must use cavalry against cavalry, but that brings a big challenge. Training cavalry is extremely costly. The ex-Xiongnu grew up on horseback, mastering riding and archery since childhood, while Han cavalry were mostly farm boys trained as adults. No matter how hard they tried, their mounted archery couldn't match the Xiongnu, so the early battles all ended in Han defeats. Fortunately, young General Wei Qing developed a new cavalry tactic, switching from archery to shock charges. So what's a shock tactic? It means Han cavalry form lines charging headlong into the enemy for close combat, nullifying the Xiongnu's archery advantage. But the Xiongnu aren't stupid. Why would they engage you up close? Wei Qing's solution was surprise attacks to cut off retreat routes. Trapped with nowhere to run, the Xiongnu had to fight in confined spaces, dramatically boosting Han's chances. In 1244 BC, Wei Qing led 30,000 cavalry to surround the Xiongnu right virtuous king's forces at night, forcing hand-to-hand combat.
This battle saw Han capture over 5,000 Xiongnu and tens of thousands of livestock. The right virtuous king fled with mere hundreds. Wei Qing earned the title Grand General.
3 years later, another famed Han general, Wu Kubing, raced over 1,000 miles to force a decisive Xiongnu battle. There, Huo Kubing killed kings like Zelen and Lu Hu, beheading over 8,000. A glorious victory. From these cases, whenever shock tactics were used, Han's victory odds soared. Units clinging to mounted archery had far bleaker records. Li Guang is a prime example. In Sima Qian's writings, Li Guang was charismatic and superb at mounted archery. He once led 100 cavalry against thousands of Xiongnu and escaped unscathed. He was also generous. When Emperor Wu rewarded him, he'd immediately share it with his troops. So he was beloved by his men, but his combat record was tragic. He lost nearly every major battle, suffering total defeats multiple times. The author notes the key reason. Li Guan refused to abandon archery for shock tactics, so he never earned sufficient military merit in his career. But why didn't the Xiongnu, beaten black and blue, adopt shock tactics like Wei Qing and Hua Kubing? Behind this lie profound systemic reasons. During cavalry charges, riders wield halberds or spears to stab enemies. It's hard to maintain balance, and a slight slip could throw them off their horses. Plus, close combat is far more brutal than long-range archery, causing cavalry casualty rates to skyrocket. Backed by strong imperial authority and strict discipline, Han cavalry could charge regardless of danger, but the Xiongnu couldn't do that. The Xiongnu were a loose tribal confederation. Leaders lacked absolute control and couldn't force troops to adopt riskier shock tactics. So, from start to finish, the Xiongnu relied mainly on mounted archery. It was through their Han-Xiongnu war successes that cavalry rose from support to main force, excelling in late Han warlord conflicts. With stirrups widespread, cavalry maintained stability during charges, amplifying their advantage over infantry. In late Western Jin, Xiongnu descended Lu Yuan and Shilei toppled the regime using cavalry. So did cavalry become invincible? Not that simple. Part 3. North-South Offense and Defense. I'll explain how the South used infantry against Northern cavalry. In 317 AD, Jin nobles fleeing south, in today's Nanjing, supported Sima Rui as emperor, founding the Eastern Jin. By then, nomads had occupied the north, establishing over a dozen regimes, historically called the 16 Kingdoms. Not until 386 AD did the Tuoba clan found Northern Wei and gradually unify the north. Compared to northern regimes, Eastern Jin was militarily weaker. The reason? China's horse breeding regions were in the northwest, controlled by the north. Cut off from warhorse sources, Eastern Jin couldn't form cavalry and relied on infantry, a disadvantage against northern cavalry. Yet, Eastern Jin lasted over a century, followed by 4 more dynasties: Song, Qi, Liang, and Chen. The North-South division lasted nearly 3 centuries. So how did southern regimes resist powerful northern cavalry? The answer lies in geography. The north had vast plains and fewer rivers, favoring cavalry, while the south differed. Here, dense hills and crisscrossing waterways made large-scale cavalry battles difficult. In fact, the 1,000-mile Yangtze River alone was an impassable natural barrier for cavalry. During the Three Kingdoms, Eastern Wu relied on the Yangtze's natural barrier to defeat Cao Wei's army. Eastern Jin similarly depended on the Yangtze defense line. Key positions like Jingzhou upstream, Jiangzhou midstream, and Yangzhou downstream were heavily garrisoned, while southern regimes pushed north to the Huai River to build defenses. This formed a Jianghua-centered defense system with dual functions. First function: expanding strategic depth. Northern offensives required crossing the Huai and Yangtze rivers while navigating endless waterways, doubling the difficulty. In 383 AD, former Qin ruler Fu Jin attacked eastern Jin. Their decisive clash happened at Fei River, a Huai tributary. Result? Former Qin's cavalry advantage vanished. Fu Jian's brother personally charged Jin lines and was killed.
This directly shattered former Qin's morale, causing total collapse.
The Zhenghua Line's second function, enabling southern counterattacks. Since the spring and autumn period, dynasties had connected the Yangtze, Kwai, and Yellow rivers via canals. This allowed southern regimes to transport troops and supplies by boat for northern expeditions. The Eastern Jin regent Huan Wen launched 3 northern campaigns, relying on waterways for logistics. Yet most southern expeditions ended in failure. Tactically, the weakness remained cavalry. Southern forces could use waterways for supply, but actual fighting required landing. North of the Huai lay vast plains favoring cavalry charges. Infantry struggled to resist. When Han Wen attacked former Yan, unfavorable conditions forced retreat. Former Yan cavalry counterattacked. Jin forces collapsed, suffering over 30,000 deaths. This shows, once away from rivers, cavalry-deficient southern armies couldn't withstand the north. Did Huan Wen know this? Of course he did. Then why did he repeatedly launch northern campaigns? Because Huan Wen sought military glory and prestige to usurp Eastern Jin's throne. Later, Emperor Wu of Lian attacked northern Wei. Emperor Xuan of Chen attacked northern Qi. Outwardly northern expeditions, but actually attempts to resolve domestic conflicts. Thus, most southern expeditions had political motives. With limited troops and resources, achievements were naturally limited. The sole exception was Liu Yu. In late Eastern Jin, court turmoil after power struggles allowed military man Liu Yu to seize control. Just like Huan Wen, Liu Yu also aimed to usurp the throne through northern expeditions. But unlike Huan Wen, Liu Yu's northern campaigns achieved astonishing results. He not only recovered Central Plains regions like Henan and Shandong, but also recaptured the ancient capitals of Chang'an and Luoyang. Unprecedented achievements. So, what was the secret to Liu Yu's success? Roughly two. First, daring to break conventions by fighting off-season. Most southern regimes chose summer for northern expeditions when rivers were full, favoring navigation. But Liu Yu advanced into the Central Plains in autumn and winter. His reasoning was, Jin forces attack in autumn. By the time they fully occupy the Central Plains, it's near winter's end. With spring's arrival, the climate warms and the Yellow River begins to thaw. At this point, Jin forces can advance into Shanxi, relying on navigation for logistics. Liu Yu's plan proved effective. Jin forces successfully recaptured Chang'an. Second, fully utilizing geographical environments for tactical innovation. As mentioned earlier, infantry usually can't withstand cavalry on plains. So what to do? Liu Yu chose battlefields like mountains, forests, and rivers to diminish enemy cavalry's power. When engaging the enemy, he also meticulously planned tactics. Take the Battle of Link as an example. In 409 AD, Liu Yu led forces against Southern Yan's army near modern-day Linhua, Shandong. Southern Yan gathered 90,000 troops, including over 10,000 cataphracts. And so-called cataphracts are cavalry where even the horses are armored. This boosts protection. Their combat strength surpasses regular cavalry, making them Southern Yan's elite force. To counter these cataphracts, Liu Yu devised detailed plans. He deployed 4,000 supply carts on both sides of the infantry formation, hanging curtains to block arrows. Each cart had a soldier armed with a long lance, a spear-like weapon, to fend off Southern Yan cavalry charges. At the same time, Liu Yu emphasized discipline, ordering troops not to fear or act rashly against cataphracts, but to follow commands. Jin cavalry were deployed around the formation for mobility, dragging Southern Yan cavalry into positional warfare where their high-speed charge advantage was neutralized. All right, so the Battle of Link lasted a full day. Southern Yan cavalry not only failed to break Jin's formation, but were themselves exhausted. This was a rare great victory for infantry against cavalry in history. Liu Yu then seized the Shandong Peninsula, leading to Southern Yan's downfall. With outstanding military achievements, Liu Yu replaced Eastern Jin in 420 AD, founding the Liu-Song regime.
At its peak, Liu Song controlled vast areas between the Yellow and Huai rivers, rivaling Northern Wei.
Sadly, this was just a flash in the pan. Late in life, Liu Yu lost Chang'an due to poor decisions. After his death, Luoyang fell too, and eventually Shandong, leading to Liu Song's collapse. Ultimately, northern regimes unified China, and this wasn't unique. Historically, China's unifiers were mostly northern regimes, like Western Jin conquering Eastern Wu, Sui defeating Chen, Qing overthrowing Ming. What's the underlying reason? Part 4. The mystery of unification. I'll explore this militarily. Liu Yu's unprecedented success came not just from his genius, but also the broader context. Northern China was then fragmented by warlords. His targets, like southern Yan, had internal strife, allowing Liu Yu to defeat them separately. Northern Wei's rise changed this. In 386 AD, Xianbai noble Tuoba Gui founded Northern Wei, gradually unifying the north over generations. In 422 AD, Northern Wei captured Luoyang, seizing the Central Plains. For the next 110-plus years, Northern Wei controlled the north while steadily encroaching southward. Southern expeditions were often loud but ineffective, never matching Liu Yu's games. So how did Northern Wei achieve this? The author argues it's inseparable from Northern Wei's 3 military transformations. Let's examine them one by one. First transformation. Early Northern Wei. The Xianbei originated from Mongolian grasslands, nomadic and skilled at archery, with tribes maintaining loose alliances. After founding Northern Wei, tribal structures dissolved, shifting to centralized monarchy. The monarch's control strengthened dramatically, enabling demands for higher risk-taking, reflected tactically. Northern Wei cavalry shifted from safer archery to riskier shock tactics, significantly boosting combat effectiveness. The second transformation occurred during Northern Wei's mid-reign. This period focused on securing territories north of the Yellow River, starting with defeating the separatist Xia regime in Shanxi. In 427 AD, Emperor Taiwu of Wei, Tuo Batao, led 20,000 cavalry to raid Tongguan City, capital of the Great Xia. In the decisive battle outside the city, Great Xiao's forces suffered heavy losses and retreated inside to hold out. After looting, Tuo Batao withdrew, realizing cavalry alone couldn't conquer the realm. From then on, Northern Wei trained infantry on a large scale. A year later, Tuo Batao returned. This time, infantry comprised 2 of the 3 main armies, with Tuo Batao assigning 30,000 troops to transport siege equipment. Through seamless infantry-cavalry coordination, Northern Wei captured Tongguan City, ending Great Xi. Afterward, infantry played crucial roles in wars against Northern Yan and Lusong. Northern Wei had forged a top-tier army with highly coordinated infantry and cavalry, combining shock power and resilience. Finally, the third transformation occurred in late Northern Wei. After securing the Central Plains, Northern Wei expanded southward, targeting the Zhanghuai Basin first. Thus began prolonged stalemates with southern regimes like Lusong, Southern Qi, and Southern Lian. Southern terrain hindered cavalry, making infantry increasingly vital. Northern Wei learned to leverage southern geography, using waterways for troop and supply transport, and honed siege tactics. In 497 AD, Emperor Shaowen Tuobahong gathered 100,000 troops to attack southern Qi, focusing the main assault at the modern Hubei Han border. In battle, Wei infantry besieged cities to lure enemy reinforcements, then cavalry struck. Logistics relied on Han River shipping. Wei's navy also harassed southern Qi's water transport. Thus, Northern Wei completed its military evolution, shifting from pure archery to infantry-led, cavalry-supported, navy-complemented urban warfare. Clearly, through 3 transformations and constant warfare, northern regimes accumulated experience, overpowering southern geographical advantages. But Northern Wei's rulers were step-born, lacking naval expertise. Thus, Wei's navy remained weak, and without a strong navy, southern regimes couldn't be fully conquered. Moreover, late Northern Wei faced political chaos, splitting into Eastern and Western Wei, who fought each other, neglecting unification. However, the war experiences summarized by Northern Wei were inherited and developed by later regimes and glorified by the Sui dynasty. In 581 AD, Yang Jian replaced the Northern Zhou regime, established the Sui dynasty, and immediately planned for the Unification War. At that time, Sui already ruled most of China with over 30 million people, while its rival Chen only held the Jiangnan region with about 2 million people, making it hard to compete with Sui's strength. But Chen's navy was still quite strong. Back then, Northern Zhou attacked Chen several times, leading to fierce battles in the Zhanghuai Basin. Relying on naval power, Chen held the Yangtze defense line, so Yang Jian didn't dare slack off. On one hand, they intensified naval training. On the other, made meticulous plans. Per Yang Jian's strategy, Sui forces would launch a full attack along the Yangtze's upper, middle, and lower reaches. Upstream, using the three gorges as a base, they'd form a large fleet to sail downstream, straight to Chen's capital, Jiankang. That is, today's Nanjing. Meanwhile, middle and downstream forces would seize chances to cross the Yangtze, preventing Qian troops from coordinating. In actual combat, Chen's navy was concentrated upstream with weak downstream defenses, so Yang Guan, later Emperor Yang of Sui, commanding downstream Sui forces, spotted a gap and decisively led a crossing. Once the Yangtze line broke, Chen had no defenses left. Sui forces quickly reached Jiankang's walls. Facing Sui's formidable infantry and cavalry, Chen's morale collapsed, leading to total defeat. Thus, the Chen dynasty fell, and China was reunified. The Sui conquest of Qin established the fundamental pattern for North-South wars. When central power collapses, southern regimes can secede long-term using the Zhanghuai Basin. But due to unsuitability to northern climates and lack of war horses, their northern expeditions mostly fail. And conversely, once unified, northern regimes leverage autocratic mobilization to offset southern geography and conquer the south for unification. All right, that concludes the 300 years of North-South wars. Notes are below the audio. See you next time.